If a U.S. park ranger ever tells you a backcountry sector is closed due to unstable slope conditions, they are lying to you. When I brought back GPS coordinates of a cabin hidden in Sector 4B, my supervisor burned my report right in front of me and threatened my pension. He said the cabin didn't exist, but he couldn't explain why my name was already printed on a crate inside it. I spent 12 years with the National Park Service before I put in my papers, and if you ask my family, they'll tell you I left because of the knee injury I took on the North Rim back in 2018. That's the official story on my file. It's clean, it's pension approved, and it lets me sleep, or try to, in a suburban house 3 states away. The real reason is sitting in a restricted backcountry grid in the Olympic Peninsula, or at least where that grid used to be. It was mid-October, right at the tail end of the season when the rain starts to turn heavy and cold enough to cut through heavy wool. I was on a routine boundary survey in Sector 4B. It's an off-limits management zone, roughly 20 miles from the nearest maintained trail and strictly closed to the public due to treacherous terrain and old-growth blowdowns. My job was straightforward: check the boundary markers from the old survey lines and note any sign of illegal poaching or squatter camps. I was 3 miles deep into a section of Sitka spruce so dense the midday sun looked like gray dishwater when I smelled wood smoke. It wasn't the smell of a damp fire either. It was seasoned Douglas fir, burning hot and dry. I stopped, dropped my pack against a hemlock, and unclipped my radio. I checked my survey map, an official USGS topographic sheet updated 3 months prior. According to the grid, there wasn't a structure within 20 miles in any direction. No historic shelters, no old logging cabins, nothing. I followed the drift up a steep rise, pushing through heavy ferns. 5 minutes later, I saw it through the hemlocks. It was a small, hand-hewn log cabin sitting in a natural clearing. Fresh, gray-white smoke was steadily pouring from a stacked stone chimney. My initial thought was standard: illegal squatters, or a poaching outfit taking advantage of the off-season. I reached down, flipped the thumb brake on my holster, and approached from the downhill side, using a large cedar for cover. I kept my eyes on the perimeter, watching for the usual signs of human habitation: chopped firewood, trash pits, boot tracks in the mud, or worn paths through the brush. There was nothing. I stepped into the clearing, and that's when my skin went cold. The ground surrounding the cabin was a thick bed of damp, untouched moss and decomposing fir needles. There wasn't a single boot print, no tire tracks from an ATV, no bent fern stems, no animal tracks, no dog prints, not even a broken twig. The moss came right up to the bottom log of the cabin wall, soft and completely undisturbed, like velvet laid over a casket. I circled the perimeter, keeping 5 yards of distance. No woodpile, no waterhole tracks. The chimney was belching hot smoke, but the wood siding was completely sealed with moss that looked decades old. Then I reached the front door. It was a heavy slab of split cedar, hung on iron hinges. The wood was raw, but the surface around the brass handle was ruined. Thousands of deep, ragged gouges were shredded into the exterior face. I leaned in close, my breath fogging in the cold air, and felt my stomach drop. They weren't axe marks or bear scratches. Embedded deep in the wood grain were fragments of fingernails, dozens of them. Some were yellowed and dry, others were fresh enough to carry dark rust-colored traces underneath. Every single scratch was carved into the outside of the door, pulled downward and toward the edges in a violent, desperate attempt to pull the door open from the exterior. People had been trying to dig their way in. Park Service. I called out, my voice sounding flat and swallowed by the moss. Anyone inside? No answer. Just the steady, rhythmic crackle of the wood fire inside. I reached out, avoiding the shredded wood, and turned the handle. It turned smoothly. The door swung inward without a single squeak. The air that hit me was thick, warm, and smelled of cedar shavings, wet wool, and stale coffee. It felt lived in. comfortable. I stepped over the threshold, my heavy boots leaving dark, wet prints on the spotless hardwood floor. The interior was small, a single room with an ironwood stove, a small kitchen table, a narrow cot against the far wall, and a door leading to a back storage room. The stove was piping hot. On top sat a blue enamel coffee pot, steaming softly. I looked down at the table. A tin cup sat beside a half-eaten plate of saltines. The coffee in the cup was steaming, ripples undisturbed on its surface. But when I looked at the floor around the table, there was a layer of fine wood dust settled over the planks, completely unbroken. No boot marks led to the chair. No dust had been swept aside. I walked over to the cot. A heavy wool blanket was thrown back, as if someone had just stepped out of bed. I pressed my gloved hand against the mattress. It was warm as a human body, but when I tried to pull the blanket down, it wouldn't move. I tugged harder. The edges of the heavy wool mattress were neatly nailed directly into the wooden frame with heavy iron spikes. A cold bead of sweat rolled down my spine. This wasn't a home. It was an arrangement. I moved toward the kitchen counter, trying to keep my breathing steady. I opened a small built-in drawer. Inside sat a heavy bronze object. I pulled it out. It was a Park Service Ranger badge, worn at the edges, bearing an official ID number. I flipped it over. The metal was cold, but the number belonged to a badge series retired in the late 1980s. Beside the drawer, a small paper wall calendar was pinned to the beam. It was a standard corporate calendar, but the month was filled with handwritten entries in black ink. I scanned down the grid. The handwriting listed routine patrol routes, complete with official NPS call signs. My eye caught today's date. In clean, sharp lettering, the box for today read, Boundary Survey, Sector 4B, Arrival 1315. My watch read 1318. Below that, for tomorrow's date, it read, Inventory and Containment. My heart was hammer-striking against my ribs now. Procedural caution was gone. The air in the cabin was starting to feel thick, heavy, and pressurized, like the air inside a diving bell. I turned toward the small back door to check for an exit. Beside the frame, hidden behind the heavy wool hanging jacket, were rows of tally marks carved directly into the wall. They were arranged in neat blocks of 5. I counted 47 complete sets. At the end of the last row, there was a single set with 4 tallies. 1 empty space remained. I reached for my radio to call dispatch, but as I pulled it from my belt, the small door to the back storage room shuddered. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was a slow, deliberate sound from the other side of the wood, the dry rasps of bone and mail dragging down the interior panel. I raised my sidearm, thumbing the safety down. Step back from the door, I yelled. No voice answered. No sound of breathing, no footsteps shift on the floorboards, just that relentless, rhythmic clawing against the wood. Then I heard a solid thunk behind me. I spun around. The front door, the heavy cedar door I had left wide open, had slammed shut. I lunged for the handle, grabbing the metal frame and pulling with all my weight. It didn't budge. The handle turned freely, but the door felt as if it had been set into solid concrete. I backed up and threw my shoulder into it, once, twice, 3 times. The wood didn't even vibrate. I turned toward the cabin's single window. Through the glass, I expected to see the rain and the gray hemlocks of Sector 4B. Instead, the glass showed the interior of another room. A narrow, dark room, lined with rough sawn cedar walls, reflecting the firelight from behind me. The cabin wasn't showing me the woods. It was enclosing. The temperature in the cabin began to surge. The wood stove roared, the iron turning a dull, dull cherry red. The heat grew stifling, dry, and suffocating. I backed into the kitchen counter, my eye catching the back storage room door. The scratching had stopped. The door swung open on its own, revealing a narrow, windowless closet. Inside were 6 long, sealed wooden boxes stacked against the wall, shaped like standard utility crates. Each crate carried a silver metal plate stamped with a name and service dates. Ranger M. Vance, 1974, 1981. Ranger D.K. Miller, 1988, 1995. Ranger T.A. Brooks, 2002, 3011. My eyes moved to the last crate on the bottom rack. The brass plate was brand new. Stamped cleanly into the surface was my full name, my badge number, and today's date underneath. The crate was open. The lid sat resting against the wall. Inside, it was lined with thick wool blanket material, the same material mailed to the cot. The floor beneath my feet groaned. The walls began to draw inward, not with a violent crunch, but with a slow, creeping alignment. The front door didn't look like a door anymore. The edges of the frame were softening, the wood grain bleeding directly into the surrounding wall logs until the outline disappeared entirely. The entryway was gone. There was only seamless timber. The room was choosing its next piece. Panic took over. I didn't try the handle again. I reached into my chest rig, pulled out my high-output emergency flare, twisted the cap, and struck it against the striker. The magnesium flared into a brilliant, blinding white-hot glare. I jammed the burning end directly into the dry wool jacket hanging by the door, then thrust it into the wood-paneled wall near the narrow chimney flue. The dry wood caught instantly. Dense, black smoke billowed upward, choking the small room. The heat became unbearable, but the structure reacted. A deep, wooden groan echoed through the floorboards, like a massive tree bending in a gale. I looked up at the stone chimney shaft above the stove. The firebox was narrow, but where the dry stacked stones met the roofline, the heat had cracked the mortar open. I scrambled onto the scorching top of the iron stove, ignored the skin blistering on my palms, and threw my body upward into the dark chimney opening, kicking wildly against the stone. The narrow space was tight, scraping the skin off my shoulders and tearing my uniform, but I clawed blindly upward toward the draft of cold air. I burst out onto the roof, tumbling over the rough cedar shingles, and pitched off the edge, falling 8 feet into the wet, cold moss below. I didn't look back. I ran. I ran through the brush, blind to the branches whipping across my face, until my lungs burned and I stumbled onto the gravel of Forest Service Road 122 2 hours later. The next morning, I sat in the district ranger's office at headquarters. My hands were heavily bandaged, my face scratched to pieces. I laid my typed incident report on the desk, complete with the GPS coordinates I had marked before approaching the clearing. My supervisor read the report quietly. He didn't look surprised. He didn't ask questions. He pulled a metal wastebasket out from under his desk, picked up my report, and dropped it inside. Then he took a silver lighter from his pocket, flicked it, and set the corner of the paper on fire. We watched it burn down to gray ash. "You had a map reading error, son," he said, staring straight at the ash. "Sector 4B is restricted because of unstable slope conditions. There are no structures out there. There never have been. You fell down a ravine and got disoriented. That's what goes in your medical file." I saw the badges. I whispered, my voice trembling. "I saw my name. You're taking a medical leave starting today," he said, his voice flat, final, and cold. "If you ever put those coordinates in an official log again, your pension is void, and you will be facing federal charges for filing false reports." 3 weeks later, 2 days before my official resignation was finalized, I drove back out to Road 122 alone. I brought my personal survey equipment, a compass, and a hatchet. It took me 4 hours to find the exact clearing. The cabin was gone. There was no ash, there was no scorched earth, no sign of a fire. But sitting precisely where the front entrance had been, there stood a single, young Sitka spruce. Growing directly out of the center of its trunk, encased entirely by the thick gray bark, was a rectangular slab of weathered cedar wood. It was the center panel of the front door. I walked up to it, my hands shaking inside my jacket pockets. Carved across the surface of the wood were fresh, frantic scratch marks. They were cut into the cedar from the inside of the tree trunk, pushing outward. I reached out and touched the wood. Trapped underneath a seam where the bark met the cedar slab was a dark, dried fragment of a human fingernail, torn off at the quick. I looked down at my own hands. All 10 of my fingernails were intact, neatly trimmed and healing. But as I pulled my right hand back into the cold morning air, I felt a sharp, phantom throb deep inside the nail bed of my index finger, exactly where that broken piece sat wedged forever in the wood. The voice on my radio sounded exactly like my dead patrol partner, but then it asked me to turn off my headlights and leave my gun in the truck. That's when I looked at the unpowered radio on my chest and heard my own voice say, "He's stepping over the guardrail now." It wasn't a call for rescue. Something down in that ravine was manufacturing audio logs to explain why my body would be found at the bottom. I kept my handheld unit set to channel 1, because that's standard protocol for an overnight shift at the Black Ridge station. It was mid-November, 2 in the morning, and a wall of freezing rain was rattling the high glass windows of the lookout tower like buckshot. When you're 40 miles past the edge of cell service, sitting over a drop-off with a visibility of 0, the radio is your only tether to the living world. You learn to read the background hum. Static has a pulse. It shifts when a squall hits the ridgeline, or when lightning cracks 15 miles off in the basin. That night, the static died. It didn't fade out, it snapped clean off, leaving a silence so heavy I could hear the filament in the desk lamp buzzing. Then, a voice cut through the dead space. It was thin, laced with a familiar, mechanical drop on the lower consonants, buried under a high-altitude whine. "Black Ridge, this is Unit 4. Do you copy, Dan?" My thumb froze over the push-to-talk button. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. Unit 4 was Marcus Vance. Marcus had been my patrol partner for 4 years until 7 months ago, when his vehicle was found parked at the trailhead of Echo Ravine. His door was wide open, his gear intact, and his body never recovered. The center of Marcus is never right.
Search and rescue swept that terrain for 3 weeks until the snow pushed them out. "Dan, I know you're on shift." The radio crackled. The signal strength meter didn't move. "Don't report this yet. Just come get me."
My heart slammed against my throat. "Station to Unit 4, I said, my voice tight and thin. "Identify yourself. This is a restricted frequency. Cut the procedural cry, Dan," the voice snapped back. The tone was sharp, tired, and carried that exact dry bite Marcus used when we were working 30-hour weekend shifts. "It's me. I'm down in the second switchback at Echo Ravine. I lost my primary light when I went over the edge. My legs pinned." "Marcus," I whispered, "where have you been? Dispatch has had you logged as missing since April." "I'm telling you, don't ping dispatch," the voice cut in, rising in urgency. "If you broadcast this over the repeater, they'll send the regional team, and it'll take them 4 hours to clear the lower road in this ice. You can be at the trailhead in 20 minutes. Just bring the haul line and the medical kit." I sat frozen at the desk. The rational part of my brain, the 10 years of standard operating procedures drilled into me by the service, demanded I patch the call through to the district office in Flagstaff. But then the radio key popped again. "Remember that mite on the South Fork?" the voice asked quietly. "When the brown bear got into the dumpsters behind the ranger cabin and you dropped your mag light down the latrine? You told me if I never mentioned it to the chief, you'd owe me one. I'm calling it in, Dan. I'm cold. Just come get me." Nobody else knew about the latrine. We had never written it in a log. We had never mentioned it to our spouses. It was a stupid private joke between 2 guys who spent 300 days a year in the brush together. "I'm on my way," I said. I grabbed my heavy storm coat, my secondary handheld, and the keys to the 4-wheel drive utility truck. I didn't call dispatch. I couldn't bring myself to log the conversation. If Marcus was somehow alive out there, if he had been hiding, injured, or trapped, I wasn't going to let administrative red tape delay getting down to that ravine. The drive down Forest Road 408 was a nightmare. The ice was slushy, the rain turning to heavy wet snow that stuck to the windshield wipers in thick sheets. The truck crawled down the switchbacks, its tires fighting for traction on the mud and shale. At 2:22, the radio on my dash crackled. "You're moving too slow, Dan. You have 15 minutes before the hypothermia sets in real bad." I hit the switch. "I'm pushing the truck as fast as I can on this ice, Marcus. What's your exact position?" "Don't use the main road," the radio instructed immediately. "The culvert blew out at mile marker 4. Turn off onto the old timber spur. Take the high line above the cut." I slowed the truck down, shining my spotlight down the timber spur. The road was overgrown with young pine and blocked by a rusty gate that had been padlocked shut since 1994. "Marcus, the timber spur is closed," I said, stopping the vehicle. "It doesn't lead to the bottom of the ravine. It dead ends at the drop-off." "It's open now," the voice replied, its tone abruptly flat, completely stripped of the panic it had carried 30 seconds prior. "Turn off your headlights." I blinked. "What?" "Turn off your headlights, Dan. The light reflects off the ice wall and burns my eyes. Turn them off." A cold knot tightened in my gut. The switchbacks were completely black. Turning off my brights on a cliffside trail in a snowstorm was suicide. "I can't do that," I said. "Leave your sidearm in the cab," the voice continued, ignoring me entirely. The cadence was accelerating now, fast and mechanical. "Leave the Glock. Bring the rope. Do not answer dispatch." I reached down and grouped my service weapon through my rain jacket. "Marcus, how do you know I'm carrying the Glock?" "I was assigned to Sig Sauer when we worked together." The radio stayed silent for 10 long seconds. The only sound was the heavy thud of snow hitting the truck's roof. When the voice answered, it didn't sound like Marcus anymore. The words were his, but the cadence was wrong, pitched slightly too high, like a recording played at 1.5 times speed. "Leave your sidearm behind. Leave your sidearm behind. Don't report this yet. Just come get me." I threw the truck into reverse, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I backing up, intending to turn around at the wide turnoff 1/2 mile back. Suddenly, my dash radio turned off completely. The display panel went entirely dark. A second later, a loud, static-heavy burst shot from the secondary handheld radio clipped to my chest harness, the one that wasn't even powered on, its battery pack unseated in my pocket. "I see your taillights, Dan," my own voice said out of the unpowered speaker. It wasn't Marcus, it was me. The audio was a perfect mimicry of my voice, down to the slight nasal drawl I have when I'm tired, but the inflection was completely lifeless. "I'm coming down the spur now," my voice broadcasted from my chest harness. "I'm leaving the vehicle. I don't need the sidearm." "No," I breathed, slamming my foot on the brake. I picked up the handheld, threw the battery pack onto the floorboard, and smashed the unit against the steel steering wheel until the plastic casing cracked into pieces. The fragments on the floorboards kept speaking. "He's at the edge." This is for me to whisper through the shattered speaker wire. "He's looking down." I grabbed my heavy flashlight, unholstered my sidearm, and stepped out into the freezing rain. I couldn't drive. The panic had taken my legs, and the truck was sliding on the mud. I had to see. I had to know what was transmitting from the edge of the ravine. I walked the last 200 yards to the lip of Echo Ravine, the wind pulling at my heavy canvas coat. The beam of my heavy-duty spotlight cut through the falling snow, painting the white void in front of me. I reached the rusted guardrail at the edge of the drop-off and shined the light straight down into the black abyss of the gorge. 200 feet below, scattered across the jagged granite boulders and frozen mud of the creek bed, were dozens of small, square shapes. They were radio units. Park Service handhelds, old State Trooper dash units, ancient CB radios from 70s era campers, modern digital transceivers, hundreds of them, wedged into the rocks like barnacles clinging to a hull. As the beam of my light hit the bottom, every single unit activated at once. A chorus of voices exploded out of the dark gorge, echoing up the rock face in a horrifying, deafening symphony. "This is Patrol 12. I'm lost near the ridge. Station, this is Sarah. My car won't start. Don't look down here. Just come get me. Dan, I'm cold." Dozens of missing people. Call sign after call sign going back decades, every single voice speaking at once, pleading, arguing, crying, demanding. Then, right at the front of the choir, My handheld radio's shattered speaker back in the truck pitched up, matching a pristine, clear signal that rose from the bottom of the pit. My voice echoed out of the canyon, loud, calm, and perfectly clear. "Dispatch, this is Unit 2. I have located the missing party at Echo Ravine. I am clearing the guardrail and descending the north wall on foot to perform the recovery. Out." The realization hit me like a blow to the solar plexus. The signal wasn't calling for help. It was building a chain of evidence. It was generating official audio logs that explained to the Park Service why another ranger's truck would be found abandoned at the edge of the cliff with the driver's side door open. It was manufacturing my voluntary descent. My hand started to steer my feet forward. My boots slid on the mud toward the edge of the drop-off. My brain screamed at me to step back, but my legs felt heavy, numb, and obedient, responding to the authoritative tone of my own voice echoing from the darkness below. "Step over the rail, Dan," my voice called up from the rocks. "It's an easy drop," I screamed, cooled my sidearm, and fired 3 rounds down into the dark, aiming blindly at the center of the noise. The sharp gunshot cracks broke the rhythm. The voices stopped instantly. For 2 seconds, there was absolute silence, save for the wind. Then, every radio in the gorge below broadcasted the exact sound of my 3 gunshots, followed by the wet, heavy sound of a body tumbling down a sharp shale slope. I turned and ran back to the truck. I didn't care about the mud, the ice, or the cliffside drop. I threw the vehicle into gear, slammed on the gas, and drove blind until I hit the paved highway 6 miles down. I filed the report at dawn. Time. I laid out everything: the dead frequency, the voice of Marcus Vance, the private memory, the shattered handheld, and a choir of radios in the canyon floor. The assistant district ranger took my statement in a quiet back office. He didn't write anything down. He listened to me with his hands folded on the desk, his face completely expressionless. When I finished, he reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a master frequency list, and drew a thick black marker line through Channel 1 for the Black Ridge sector. "The Black Ridge Tower is being decommissioned at the end of the month," he said flatly. "You're being reassigned to administrative duty at the regional headquarters in Tucson." "There are dozens of radios down there," I shouted, my voice cracking from exhaustion. "Marcus didn't wander off. Something is using our own logs to drag us down into that hole. You had an auditory hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation and severe weather conditions," he replied without raising his voice. "If you mention this frequency to the regional press or to Marcus's family, you will be terminated immediately for gross negligence and mental instability." I left the service 3 months later. I moved to New Mexico. I work in an auto parts store now, miles away from any forest, mountain, or ridgeline. Last year, I got a call from a guy I used to work with out at the Flagstaff Depot. We were catching up, talking about old times, when he brought up a new transfer, a young rookie assigned to the Lower Valley Patrol. "Kid went missing last Tuesday," my friend said over the line. "Left his truck idling at the edge of the old timber spur near Echo Ravine." My blood turned to ice. "Did they find a log?" "Yeah," my friend sighed. "That's the strange part. Dispatch pulled the night recordings from the main server. They got an automated entry logged at 3 in the morning. He paused, shuffling some papers over the line. "It was strange, man. The recording used your old call sign. It sounded just like you." It took a deep, shaky breath right before it spoke. Exact same pattern you used to have whenever you were nervous on the mic. "What did it say?" I managed to ask, though I already knew. My friend cleared his throat. "It just said, 'Don't report this yet. Just come get me.'"